Hello, hello. What is good, everybody? Now, I was thinking of doing a pre-recorded video of the FNAF movie, giving my thoughts on it. But I've pretty much realized that pretty much a ton of reviews have already come out. And pretty much every opinion under the sun that I'm going to make has already been echoed through some other content creator. So I thought it would be more interesting to kind of have a talk and discussion about this movie, to see others' thoughts as well as mine. Now, to start out, I do think a lot of Five Nights at Freddy's fans are really going to enjoy this movie. I think it does meet certain requirements that it needed to meet. For one, the set pieces are fantastic. The whole pizzeria looks fantastic. The animatronics look fantastic. And Jim Henson's studio did a fantastic job designing these animatronics. And I think that went fantastic. The problem is the plot, I think, hardly made any sense. The way that it was structured made the animatronics not very threatening and scary, which I think around the time that the trailers were coming out, there was a lot of controversies with how the animatronics were going to be handled, such as the red glowing eyes and looking and moving too much like real people and not enough like animatronics that aren't supposed to move. And I think that at points they were a little too animated and they went too far. It got a little exhausting for me, especially seeing the cupcake animatronics. Spoiler, make sure that everyone here is aware this is a spoiler review. Seeing it fly around like Superman, I thought that was really weird, because I thought if this was going to be a killer robot, clearly Chica holding it would have put it down or thrown it at a person, because that would have been more practical than just seeing this thing floating around like Superman. It was a little bizarre, and I think it was a little too cartoony at times. So the FNAF movie had this very weird predicament where it has a lot of young viewers, particularly that would want to see this movie, because the games themselves are played by a lot of kids. A lot of kids love the games. So you have one side of the fan base who's all like, we want this to be a hard R, we want this to be a serious take on FNAF, Five Nights at Freddy's, and you have basically the same group saying, we want this movie to sell tickets. Why are they putting it on Peacock? So on one hand, you have them saying, listen, we want this to be really nuanced script, we want this to be really scary. On the other hand, they want this to be mainstream enough to get sequels. I mean, it's very hard to do both. So they could have very easily went down a route where they did a more nuanced script, like per se going into the history of the pizzeria and going more into like Matthew Lillard's character, I forget, William Afton. They could have made like this whole origin story of William Afton, him going crazy, creating these violent animatronics, and had this really, really nuanced villain origin story. They could have gone that route, could have made it very bloody, could have made it very gory, could have been really good. But in the same way, a lot of those 11-year-olds who would want to get tickets and show this to their parents, their parents would probably say no. I mean, there was some violent scenes in this movie. Particularly, I was impressed with the scene where they had essentially people break into the pizzeria in the daytime. I thought that was really cool, and they were picked off. The whole crew was picked off one by one by all of the animatronics. I thought that was easily the best scene in the movie. I've seen many reviewers go into it and gush over that scene, because I think that really captured the horror of Five Nights at Freddy's a lot better than most scenes. I mean, at the point where you saw them essentially building table forts and playing around with the animatronics, they slowly began to get less and less ominous. And to me, it felt like on one end you had a serious horror movie, on another hand you had a Disney Channel original film. And I don't think that those scenes really meshed together and made the film work. And a lot of the critics who were unfamiliar with the game saw this film and were all like, this is really inconsistent. Tonally, this doesn't make sense for a serious horror film. And I totally get it. And I understand that a lot of the fan base really loved this film, really enjoyed it. But in the same way, I'm like, a lot of these plot points do not make sense. Particularly, I thought it would have been more interesting had they gone into this whole thing where essentially Josh Hutcherson's character was having to contemplate whether or not these things are alive. These animatronics are alive. That they're possessed by ghosts in the first couple of nights. And he has this thing where he's like contemplating, is this real life? And am I seeing ghosts or not? And I think that would have been a more interesting development cycle of the story and would have been a bit more intriguing. But instead, most nights that his character was there, he was sleeping through them. Like, the dude was asleep, wakes up, and it's like, well, that's weird, and gets, scared. Like, I'm like, all right, cool. So, like, all these cool concepts that the game had, the origin story behind the pizzeria, the mystery of William Afton, none of that was expanded upon or really explored in this script. None of it was really expanded upon. A lot of the dialogue was not coming together. It was a little goofy at times, focusing more on like this weird supernatural ghost story to a point where it's just like, this is totally unrealistic. You have these practical effects, these practical animatronics, and then you choose to make the cupcake hover around and fly like Superman. I'm like, why? Why, bro? And that's kind of where I'm at. That's pretty much where I'm at. It is a disappointing deal, I think. They cut so many scenes from the movies that would have made this peak cinema. I don't know about that, Cartoony. I don't know. I mean, based on the script, a lot of it didn't make sense to me. A lot of it didn't make sense. Character motivations weren't fully fleshed out, especially the cop character, Vanessa. I mean, at one point she's playing around with the animatronics and encouraging, I believe the main character's name is Mike, and his kid to play with them. And then all of a sudden something goes wrong, and then she starts screaming at him, all like, yeah, why did you bring her here? You shouldn't have brought her here. This is really, really bad. Like, inconsistencies like that just felt really out of place. I also find it weird that she knew that her father was dangerous, and all this time she was a police officer, and knew that he was a murderer, and didn't tell anyone. Like, this is a bad person. I'm not gonna lie. And they're presenting her as one of the protagonists of the story. Like, that's inconsistent as heck. Like, anyone with critical thinking skills could tell you this is a really bad person. And once the whole fifth night was over, right? And, they find dead bodies, nobody informed the cops by the end of the movie or had anyone investigate the issue. And they left William Afton spring-locked in the suit. And I'm like, these guys are people, they're flawed, but what they're doing here does not make any sense. Does not make any sense, especially when one of the characters is a police officer that lied, that was covering up murders, right? Like, excuse me? You should be fired. Not only that, in prison. In prison. So if I'm understanding the plot right, the plot doesn't make sense. The plot doesn't make sense. Just everyone let that go. Everyone let that slide. Am I crazy? It's very confusing. It's a very confusing story. It's not coming together. But as far as a fanfic, I think it does very well. But the thing that offended me the most, like walking out, like leaving the movie, because I watched it at home, I felt like Gordon Ramsay eating a sandwich but realizing someone spit all over that sandwich. I was furious, bro. I was furious. Like, this is not how you put together a movie at all. At all. I mean, like, they had everything going for it. They had amazing set pieces, amazing animatronics, and a good director, might I add. I think the directing wasn't terrible, but the writing was just garbage. The writing was garbage. So you have elements of a really good story here, really good cast. Anthony Lillard. I mean, stellar casting there. But it's like, you failed to deliver. You've got all this nice wrapping paper around the box, but what's inside the box is shallow. It's not very good. So that's kind of how I felt. I would say the highlight of the movies, one major highlight of the movie, is I think every YouTuber that did a cameo, a lot of them were really, really funny. I think Matt Pat's was the best, to be honest. I think the YouTube cameos were fun. Some of them were pretty well integrated into the script, and the delivery was good, which I can appreciate because YouTubers aren't actors. So, I from what I saw as far as the cameos, I liked them. And the ones that I knew I was like, that's really funny a couple of times, but I don't think I caught everyone that was there. But I did like that. I did have enjoyment and amusement from that, so that's something. But yeah, overall, I'd say this movie is a disappointment. I would say it's a 5 out of 10 because I can't say I wasn't having fun watching this movie because it is a fun watch. But the more that I picked it apart upon leaving it, the more criticisms I had, the more things weren't connecting, the more plot points weren't making sense. And so, yeah, my hope is if they make a Five Nights at Freddy's 2, that it's much better written, that they explore the lore of William Afton, what made him go crazy, how these animatronics were made, and why. I think that would be very, very interesting of a script, but I don't know if that's going to happen. Given that this was pretty much a family film, I think if it comes to movies, the best future is that in 10 years, once everyone who's played the games has grown up, they reboot it to make something much more serious, much more for adults, or, you know, the fans take over and continue to make fan films and maybe make better films than what Hollywood is producing. That's the only future that I see if we're talking about cinema when it comes to the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. And honestly, this kind of solidified this for me of being more of a kids franchise than being a serious franchise, which I hate to say it because when I was looking into a lot of the lore from different YouTubers, it seemed like there was a lot of nuance and interesting concepts in this lore, but pretty much from this movie, they've solidified that this is for kids, genuinely, and a lot of my interest of the games just died. Like, there's nothing worse than that. Because I was just getting into Five Nights at Freddy's. I just played the first game, the second, and the third. And I plan on playing the fourth once we hit 500 subscribers. But pretty much this movie pretty much killed all my interest. So after FNAF 4, I think I'm done. I genuinely think I'm done, bro. I genuinely think I'm done. Because, you know, the direction they took is it certainly was very kid-friendly. Certainly didn't expand upon any of these ideas and concepts of the lore that was hinted at, or that it seemed like YouTubers were writing better scripts and filling in the gaps of what was going on between games and things and coming up with ideas based off of, you know, subtle hints that the games were giving. It seemed like a lot of these YouTubers could write a better movie than the actual script writers of this film. Like, that's saying something, bro. That's saying something, bro. Like, this was not something that I think was well handled, personally. But, you know, I understand. I kind of get why they went the family route direction. At the end of the day, it's money. And they felt like that was the way that they were going to sell more tickets. So, yeah. But yeah, I'll get into the comments. That's pretty much just my thoughts. An incoherent script, very nice set pieces, very nice animatronics. The animatronic design is just brilliant. The pizzeria looks brilliant. The directing looks pretty solid. A lot of really good scenes in there. But there's no meat in the bones when it comes to the script. The script is just weak. Just one of the weakest scripts I think I've seen in a while. A lot of the dialogue's flat. A lot of the story points don't make sense, and it's very incoherent at times. So, alright, we got Cartoonia. I've been a fan of this series since like 2015, but Security Breach honestly broke me. Yeah, I know. During Security Breach, they made a ton of 180s to the plot point. Like, you know, they basically wrapped everything up, put a bow on it, and then they were like, okay, we're opening the plot again when it comes to the video games. Yeah, I agree to that. The series should have ended after Ultimate Custom Night. They could have sold more games. I mean, honestly, they could have remastered some games. I think that would have been fine. But this movie, yeah, definitely makes me think that they've been running this franchise to the ground 100%. 100%. It's not great. It's not great. They definitely should have explored William's character or saved him for a sequel. Exactly. I mean, they can still save him for a sequel to kind of look into the lore. What bugged me, I think, a lot is there was none none of the stuff in the video games. Like, as far as the cams, they were there, but the main character was not utilizing them, or really worried about the threat of animatronics, of being locked in the building, animatronics coming to kill him. Because like I said, he was asleep. Most nights he was there. He was asleep. There was hardly any build-up to him having to realize that these are ghosts, right? Possessing animatronics. Like, it could have been a story of, well, are these things malfunctioning, or is there more to the story, without having dream sequences every 2 seconds? Like, come on, guys. Come on. I feel like show, not tell would have been a much better route for the script. Would have been a much better route. They should probably make at least Five Nights at Freddy's 2 and 3. For the movies, I'm not against it. I mean, if you look at the Conjuring franchise, they have a lot of flops. Like the first Annabelle movie, complete disaster. But then you have Annabelle, the origin story of Annabelle. Well, I forget what it's called, but it's really good. You have the Conjuring 1 and 2. The Conjuring 3 wasn't necessarily good, and you have movies like The Nun that are just complete flops. So it's possible that they could end up with a hit with the sequel, with a much more nuanced script and directors even. I'm not saying it's impossible, so I'm not going to be a hater here and say don't make FNAF 2. They very well could make it, and it could be just a critical hit. And could actually impress me, because this movie didn't. I actually full on agree with the critics' assessment. The plot didn't really make very much sense. But what I'm hearing is a lot of them say it could have benefited if he was just there one night instead of 5. I mean, but it's called Five Nights at Freddy's. I don't know how you're gonna pull that off, bro. So, both Nun movies are definitely not good. Yeah. The Conjuring is like hit or miss, bro, when it comes to those movies. It's either great, decent, or it's just flat out terrible. I think it would have been more interesting to have the main character explore and kind of investigate what happened in the pizzeria, and then have like these time scenes where it just goes back in time and showing and giving us clues of what is going on here until we accept that these robots are possessed and not malfunctioning. I think that would have been a much more interesting, much more nuanced script than what we had gotten. So, yeah. So what I'm seeing from the chat is a lot of people feel really disappointed with the film. I definitely share that sentiment. I definitely share those feelings because I've seen a lot of the YouTube videos of YouTubers exploring the lore and what could have been, what direction they could have taken, and there's a lot of different ideas there presented in those, such as the background of the pizzeria and the background of the animatronics. None of those concepts or ideas are really shown, or any concepts at all into that. They're pretty much pre-established to exist, and nobody knows why William Afton's character created them or is a serial killer. He's two-dimensional, even though he has a really, really experienced actor playing the character, a brilliant actor. So it's like, why do they underutilize this character? You've casted a really, really, really good actor that has years of experience in Hollywood, and this is the best you can give us. Like, you gotta be kidding me. I would have preferred that they explored the story of the missing children and why they wanted Abby to become one of them. I think that would have been really cool. Like, think about a murder mystery, right? You have maybe like a cop movie of kids disappearing around town, and they're all linked to this pizzeria. They go and check the pizzeria, and they don't find anybody. So then they think that there's a murderer, and then the owner of the pizzeria is now, having financial issues because of all the rumors in town that there is some serial killer taking children, and they've all recently were at this pizzeria or something like that. That could have been a much more sophisticated script and plot, and they could have done just as much with it. It would have been more like Stephen King's It, for example, I think. But it's too violent. It's too scary. They don't want to send. They don't want 11-year-olds asking to get tickets to see that. So, like I said, they can do that in the future, but it's probably going to be like 10, 20 years down the line when they can reboot it, and we're all like 45 years old by then. Because pretty much everyone that grew up on the franchise has matured, and now they can mature the franchise with the audience that loved it. But right now, they can't get away with that. They just can't. So, well, I think that's all I got. We can head over to Smash Bros. Ultimate. Thank you so much for everybody who tuned in. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you haven't already. But yeah, I'm hoping for the best. If we get a sequel, I hope it's very well written. I hope they explore the lore a little more, the origins behind these animatronics, because they failed to do so in this film. They failed to make a nuanced script, but they have a lot of really, really good foundation here. They had really good sets, really fantastic looking animatronics, so I'm not saying all hope is lost. So, everyone take care, stay safe, see you next time. Now over to Smash Bros.